to make a public comment? Hearing none, we'll move to approval of minutes. Do we have a motion?
So moved. Second.
Motion by Pierce, second by Tatson. All in favor? Aye. Motion carries. Next item is the consent calendar. Do we have a motion on the consent calendar?
I actually have a question on one item.
Okay, go ahead.
I probably should have brought it up before. On item 6, I have a question on the as-bills that are being done as part of that change order. Is there a potential to get some of that cost back from the electrical contractor, or is there a reason why we don't have that from the contractor?
Good morning. It's very unlikely that we'll be able to get that back from the contractor, because the contractor side of the business.
I wondered if that was the answer. Okay.
The contractor's what?
Out of
When I
business.
was-
That's the reason we can't get it. Okay, that answers that.
Okay, I think we have a motion from Tatson. You have a question too?
The second is, the fact that they're out of business, they're probably going through a process of taking claims from their creditors. So why do we not add ourselves to the list of creditors? You might get 5 cents on the dollar.
Is it worth the cost?
I don't know, man, but I'm saying
There could be a possibility for that coming towards the bonding company. The bonding company is not going to respond for them.
we should.
We put our names to the list, I can investigate that. I know that there are vendors out there that haven't been paid. I know that even the prime contractor is out of money with them. Can definitely investigate that option.
I was suggesting maybe we spend a little time investigating to see whether there's a possibility. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? I think we did have a motion from you, Tatson, second from Pierce. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. That brings us to our regular agenda items. Item 7, legislative update.
Good morning, Commissioners. You have quite a lengthy report on what's happening at the federal level. There's quite a bit of transition and things are changing every day. So there are a few things that I just want to touch on. I'm not going to go through all of those pages before Mark Watts gives his report. First, it looks like President-elect Trump has made a selection for the new U.S. DOT Secretary, Elaine Cow. She was former Deputy Secretary of U.S. DOT, so she's familiar with the department. She was also the former Labor Secretary, so she has quite a bit of experience in Washington, D.C. So, and I saw Randy say it, I wasn't going to mention it, but she is also married to Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader. So it'll be interesting to see how that pick plays out in the coming years in regards to transportation policy. And also recently, U.S. DOT released a solicitation. They want to designate autonomous vehicle proving grounds in the United States. It was a very short solicitation. I think they released it right before Thanksgiving, and they're asking for proposals by December 19th. So it's something that we're talking with our partners and looking at very carefully. They want to designate proving grounds, and they're requiring certain amounts of investment, but there's no money attached at this point in time to that designation. And they're also accepting proving ground applications from a variety of different entities, including urban cores, college campuses, and other places. So we have some questions about, how do you test the limits of technology in downtown San Francisco on the Embarcadero versus a place like Gomentum Station? They're very different. So we're currently consulting with our partners to decide if that's something we're going to move forward with or not. And there's quite a bit in your packet, so I know that you've all reviewed that. And with that short report. Unless there are any questions, I'll turn it over to Mark Watts to talk about what's happening at the state level. Okay.
Cut you up. Your mic's not working. No, no.
No?
Testing.
Grab the other mic.
The other one didn't work either.
Just take it off.
Thank you.
There you go.
There you go.
Mr. Chairman and committee members, I'm pleased to be here. The first thing I want to communicate is yesterday was the final day of the special session, and it did come to a conclusion without any action by the legislature on transportation funding proposal. Not in spite of that, there have been a lot of rumors on a daily basis that required careful monitoring of the potential daily files just to make sure nothing was being scheduled. So we're in that funny period in our Constitution where one session has ended and the new one doesn't convene until the 5th. So we're kind of safe from any action by the legislature at this point in time. I think the other thing that's notable were the election results in terms of the overall complexion of the legislature. The Assembly did achieve an increase in membership, so they have a supermajority of Democratic members plus one. So they have 55, which is one over the 54, two-thirds limit for a supermajority. And in the Senate, the game took a little bit longer to get to a conclusion when the Senate District 29 results finished on Election Day with the Republican candidate in the lead by 2,000 votes, but over the last month it eroded to a loss by the Republicans. So the Senate, too, has a supermajority of two-thirds at 27. What this means and how it plays out, it's not clear, but it certainly relieves the Republican caucuses from any responsibility or activity with respect to transportation funding taxes and the like, because they just point to the Democrats and say they control the place. So we'll see how that plays out. The last time, 2 years ago, I believe, there was a supermajority, or I think it was 2 years ago, that came to a conclusion without a lot of activity that folks had expected. So we'll just have to see how it plays out. In terms of transportation finance, preceding the close of the special session, a communication was distributed signed by the governor and the speaker and the pro tem, indicating that no further action was going to take place in special session. However, they were committed and intended to pursue transportation finance into the new session, and with a commitment to work on it and get it resolved as early as they can in the session. We're hoping Q1 is what the translation of early means, not Q2 or 3. We'll see how that plays out. But in that vein, we've also picked up that both chairs of the transportation committees will start on Monday, the 5th, with new bills, both of which we haven't seen anything yet, will be the previous versions on a diet. I'll put it that way. The Senate version had been or the joint version that had been circulating for the last 2 months was at about $7.5 billion annual on an ongoing basis. And I think the new taxes in the Senate package will be closer to $5 billion and include some portion of the truck weight fees coming back to add to that $5 billion in new revenues. It's not clear what the Assembly chair will launch, but we assume it'll be somewhere in the $6 billion range, both of which are significantly less than where they had been earlier. We also picked up that the Senate package will include a number of modest reform elements on how Caltrans operates and how, for example, one example is changing the encroachment permit process to make it a little looser so it encourages economic development, takes the time frame down from 6 to 9 months to get an encroachment permit. So little elements like that are included in his measure. So we look forward to seeing them as they come into print probably on Tuesday, and we'll give an initial analysis and quick take on it to Lindsay after I've seen it. The last thing I thought I'd bring to your attention is a remnant, or not a remnant, a feature of the effort last year by the governor and certain legislators to reform the PUC. It will show itself in the form of a governor's reorganization plan. That's the mechanism that governors can use to restructure elements of their executive branch. And in this case, the governor's reorganization plan, or GRP, is going to focus on some of the safety elements related to passenger services that the PUC regulates now, and transfer those safety functions, the non-regulatory portion of the safety functions, enforcement and the like, to the administration. And I think the Cal Transportation Agency Secretary Brian Kelly will be guiding that effort. I only raised it because part of what's being transferred over would be responsibility for TNCs, the transportation network companies, the Ubers and Lyfts, and since they're getting into AVs, we're going to watch it a bit to make sure they don't do anything in that GRP that's disadvantageous to where we are today. So with that, I bring my report to a conclusion.
Thank you. Questions?
Forward to next time. See what happens.
Okay, the next item, Interstate 80, San Pablo Dam Road Interchange Reconstruction Phase 1. Request to increase contract allotment for construction contract number 416 with Rosimer and Wall Construction Services.
Morning, Chair and committee members. My name is Ivan Ramirez. I am the construction manager for the authority, and this is an action item where we are requesting that the construction allotment be increased by $1,850,000. At the November of 2015 meeting, the authority awarded the construction contract to Rosimer and Wall Incorporated. And at that time, the construction allotment was $19,303,096. Out of that, $1,028,000 was for the contingency. At the October 2016 board meeting, the board transferred some funds from the CCTA state furnished materials and the supplemental work items into the contingency by an amount of $630,000. Without changing the total construction allotment. So at that time, as the committee is well aware, we had identified a number of issues that had come up during construction, primarily due to utilities and underground conflicts that were unanticipated. Since that time, we have continued to encounter those type of issues, as well as some design-related issues have come up. And we also have encountered a mandate by Caltrans to change the asphalt concrete mix. And that has increased the cost of the project significantly. So since October, the staff and the CM team that is administering this contract evaluated the total budget of this construction contract, taking into account all the costs that have occurred so far and the anticipated costs that we see coming up through the conclusion of the project, and that's how we came up with this new total construction allotment of $1,850,000. And I am going to give you a brief presentation so that you can see some of the conflicts that we're talking about, and that will give you a better idea of what we're contending with here. So I'm going to highlight 6 of them very briefly here. So the very first one is a directive that Caltrans has put out. They put these directives, it's a normal way for them to conduct business when they have encountered a situation that needs immediate attention. So in this particular case, what they have determined is that the current spec that uses reclaimed materials for asphalt concrete has the potential to develop cracks. And of course, that affects the longevity of the asphalt. So what they have told us, and this is true for all their own contracts as well, is that the contractor come up with a new design mix, and based on that design mix, the determination will be made whether they can use the 25% recycled material or they have to lower it to only 15%. Of course, there's a cost because you're using recycle as opposed to virgin material. In our case, our supplier has to come up with a new mix where they're going to have to use just 15% recycled material. They cannot come up with a mix that will be acceptable by Caltrans using the 25% reclaimed material. And we're estimating this change order to be about $300,000. I also want to assure the committee that a lot of effort was spent by staff trying to not do this because we feel it's being changed in the middle of the game, what they're requesting. But we had no success, and like I mentioned earlier, this is something that Caltrans themselves are doing in their own projects. This is an initiative that we took to try to keep the project going, but it's got some impacts. So along El Portal, and I wish I could point to it, but up over here, what is highlighted in yellow is stage one of the work, and what's highlighted in white is the new on-ramp onto westbound 80. So we had significant impacts along the yellow, and it was coming up to the point where if we did not allow the contractor to move to stage two, that it was going to then start delaying the contract significantly. So what we decided to do is to rearrange certain things in the yellow area to allow the contractor to come and work at the same time on the white area, and therefore try to keep the contract on schedule. But having said that, the fact that they're working at two locations and mobilizing, demobilizing, moving crews and waiting for us to give them answers to the issues that have come up, it's got some impacts. At this point, we have estimated that cost to be $120,000, but the work is still ongoing, and it might not raise to that level. It might come in a little less than that. This is one that we've been talking about frequently. As you can see, the picture there on the right side of the slide, we have a foundation cage in place, and what's supposed to occur there right after that is to put a column casing, so that will be the column that would then take the bridge over across to the far side of the picture across the freeway. But as you can see on that picture, there's a pole there with three very thick lines, and we knew that we had to remove one of them. We had a contract with AT&T to come back and remove it. Unfortunately, they had a hard time coming out. We even asked the executive director, Randy Wasaki, to contact people that he knew at AT&T. That eventually helped, but it had delayed the contractor up to that point. And on top of that, not only were those lines from AT&T there, but then we discovered that there was also a Comcast line and there was also a Conterra line, so we had to work through those. And right above that, very high, you can see that there's a PG&E. Those are high-power electric lines, and we also have to spend some resources moving those out of the way to allow for the work to proceed in a safe manner. This is a typical situation that we encountered there as well, where I try to display here on the red, that's the circumference of a CADH pile. And as you can see right there, where we're supposed to put this pile, there's three unidentified utilities. There's a PG&E gas line, there's an East Baymont water line, there's a sanitary sewer line. So for each one of these, you have to contact the owner. They have to let us know whether they're active or not. Can we remove them? A lot of times we have to relocate them before the contractor can proceed and do the work that they're supposed to be doing. In that time, they're just working, or they have to move their crew somewhere else. And of course, there's inefficiencies associated with that work. Here, it's a problem that I want to highlight to you that it's an additional cost that we're encountering in construction now, but had the contractor known what was coming during bid time, they probably would have put her in their bid. So the cost of the project the cost of this work will still be within the project, but it would probably happen at the bid time. Was what's happening here is you see the sign wall that is all the way to the right. We have to remove that sign wall, and we provided a pay item to the contractor to remove that sign wall. However, you cannot proceed with the work unless you also remove the barrier beneath it, and also there's some piles that are supporting the structure that per specification have to be removed to 3 feet below the ground. So that cost was not actually written into the contract. So we had to pay the contractor to remove it and dispose it, and that's approximately $150,000 to do that work.
Excuse me, Ivan, on that's on the contract documents, though, to do that.
So it's a good question because you know a good construction package will have the plans, which tells you the limits, gives you details, dimensions. You will have a specification that will tell you to what grade, if that's what you're looking for, and then you have a pay item. That's why it's called plans, specifications, and estimate.
You mean it wasn't on the bid form?
It
Because
was-
they did, even though they have a complete set of construction documents, because they didn't put a line item down, they're off the hook?
They are off the hook, sir.
We didn't.
Wow.
It's because we didn't put a line item down, not them. It's not up to them it's up to them if they observe irregularities to do inquiries during the bid process. But if nobody discovers that,
So it wasn't a lump sum contract, it's actually a contract only based on what they put on the bid form, regardless of what the contract documents
Right.
are. Because, there are some people in this business that accept only lump sums, that an hour after the bid, say, give us a breakdown. That way the bid is based on
Right.
the contract documents. We ought to maybe, it's not a big item, but we ought to, maybe if we're going to AAA projects, maybe think about how to protect ourselves. And then it would have come up during the bid process that somebody says, hey, I'm noticing this isn't on the bid form. But okay, thank you.
through the chair. This might not be the time yet, but contingency that was put in place is still in place?
So the contingency that was originally allotted into the contract, it has it's been spent.
That's where okay.
And now we brought additional money at the October 2016 board meeting, and that money is about to run out. And therefore, that's what we need, this additional installment.
So my question there, do we now go for another contingency?
So,
I've never gone through a thing where we had 3 contingencies.
no, this is just a single contingency that we are
Well,
increasing.
no, okay, I know, but we keep running out of money, right?
Yes.
Well, the numbers in here, the amount of additional funds we're asking for replenishes a contingency fund for additional potential costs into the future. Now, there's no guarantee we won't come back, but the costs that we've identified here are up to a certain point of what we're asking for, but we are still asking for additional funds for changes that could potentially happen based on the remaining amount of work. So there's 174,000, I think is the number, right, for additional undefined contingency.
So, Commissioners, what we've asked our team to do is to analyze the situation today, figure out any potential issues for tomorrow, and only come back this time for the dollars to finish this project. Is that correct?
That is correct.
That's right. So there may be some dollars in here that we may have to give back, which is a good thing. But we don't want to keep coming back to you to say we want $500,000 more, $500,000 more, another $400,000. They've done a pretty good analysis of all issues that they think they're going to hit us as we complete this project within the next 30 days.
Yeah, we'll hope to complete the project by the end of January.
And we have an issue with an on-ramp, right?
Well, that's the main work that remains to be done, and
That's
some
right.
of the work in there, it's underground, so we're a little.
So anytime
nervous.
they've been digging under the ground, they found that the as-built or the information is lacking, and they've hit something.
So are you still have more you still have more to do, right?
I have two.
Once you finish up your presentation, then we'll go to questions.
This is a plan view or an overhead view of I-80, and the yellow area is an area that we have to do some overlay, part of this contract. What was not identified at the time is that we also have traffic loops in there. So when we come in and have to do some grinding to make this existing surface smooth to allow for the new overlay, most likely we're going to damage these traffic loops. Now, at this point, that cost is estimated to be at around $110,000, but staff here, Hisham and myself, have engaged with Caltrans, and we're asking them to relieve us of doing this work on this contract, and maybe they can do it as part of one of their maintenance contracts into the future. We believe that we're going to be successful in eliminating at least some of the work and hopefully eliminating any work that might damage any of those traffic loops. But at this point, we have identified the cost of $110,000 if we have to go and proceed with the work as it is supposed to occur under this contract. And this is the ramp that is of the old pedestrian overcrossing. In the background, you see the new pedestrian overcrossing. And what's going on here is that right in front of this structure is the school. So we really couldn't do the demolition during daytime hours because we're going to impact the kids. And just beyond those trees that you see on the right side, there is also some houses, and there also is a kind of like a slope, so any noise that we could create by demoing this structure will go up into the posts and it will create a lot of noise. So we also couldn't do the work at night. We asked the city if we could close the street right after the kids were out of school, and they said, no, you cannot do it. We'll let you close it at 6 o'clock. So in essence, the contractor was restricted to a 4-hour window, including, putting preventive measures so that they don't damage the streets and the sidewalk, coming in, demoing, making sure the structure is safely in place before they leave, and then remove the debris or at least clean it up. And that was very inefficient for them to do that work. So, and this is, of course, how it looks like, and we had to do the towers, and we had to close the streets. So I just wanted to highlight, staff wanted to highlight the issues that we have been coming up with in this project, because they have increased the construction cost significantly, and we are working to eliminate a lot of costs if we can, and we're also trying to take a lot of lessons so that when we go out and do other projects in this area, that we're going to be able to not repeat the same mistakes.
More questions?
Okay.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just want to finish out my presentation. So staff has identified several funding sources to plug this $1,150,000. $700,000 is to be funded with the West Contra Costa Transportation Advisory Committee Sub-Regional Traffic Mitigation Program fees. $125,000 is coming back to us from East Bay MUD, because one of the change orders that we had to issue had to do with repairing some damage and some impacts to the contractor from a water line that was broken by East Bay MUD, that belongs to East Bay MUD. And we put up a claim against them. They have acknowledged that they might, that there is an impact, and they might reimburse us. So we're pursuing that. $200,000 will be from Measure J. $820,000 comes from the West County Construction Reserve Program. So with that, again, staff recommends that you increase the construction allotment by $1,150,000 to a new total allotment of $21,153,096. And I'm open to any questions.
Go ahead, Don.
Thank you for the report. I was wondering, in the programmatic construction reserve, where you expect to take some of this money from, to what extent has that been designated for other uses, and how much is left, you might say?
So during the 2013 strategic plan, we actually set aside a reserve in each sub-region, and it was a percentage of how many projects they had programmed in the strategic plan. In West County, we had the least reserves because they had the least amount of projects in the program projects, and that was approximately in the latest strategic plan, $900,000. So this is basically most of it. 825 is most of the reserve.
You look at the remaining projects that are to be done in West County, do you sense that the remaining amount is sufficient?
So the next project on the list to be done is the I-80 Central Avenue Phase 1. And, we're doing everything we can to avoid some of the mistakes that were made here so we don't have to come back. But in that project, it has two phases. Phase 2 is not fully funded, and it has significant Measure J funds. So worst case scenario, we could take money from Phase 2 to get Phase 1 done. But of course, that's not the intention. The intention is to get it right the first time.
Thank you.
Well, the other active construction project over there is Hercules, and that's wrapping up, and there's not a need for additional funding to close that out. At least that's my understanding.
Newell?
Well, first of all, Ivan, thanks for all the work, the background on this. This is unusual. This isn't normally what happens. It's not a big project, but I think given the age of this infrastructure, that it really hasn't been touched in 50 years for several portions of it. It's one of the tightest sites that we're working in. I think it's reasonable, probably not completely unexpected. And I think, though, there are, with the designers on this, some lessons learned there that obviously a way that we can look at the contracting to help protect our agency. But I think this is wise. I think we need to move forward. I'd be willing to go ahead and make a motion. I appreciate the thoughtfulness and the depth. When we have changes like this, we do it carefully and cautiously. And Ivan, I think together you and Hisham have done a good job to get us to this point. And I think you've looked far enough ahead that we can see the horizon here that we're going to have a clear shot. This is a really much needed project for this area. So,
Julie?
Thank you. On the Central Avenue project, as it comes up, are we looking to encounter some of these same infrastructure unknown things below the ground? I would suspect, because it's all pretty much the same vintage, that's likely. Is there any way to build something into the contract that gives us a little more help to make sure that those who own the aging infrastructure in the way or that is unexpectedly there have to help compensate for some of the cost?
So are you suggesting if we encounter a AT&T line that we have some kind of agreement with AT&T because they didn't let us know that it was there?
Well, or if they didn't know it was there, it should be part of their responsibility, I would think. But maybe not. I don't know. I'm just, some of these things are maybe it's how do we share the risk?
that's the drawings with them to ask each agency to define and look at conflicts. We'll probably get 50% of the conflicts that they might, but it would put East Bay Mud and the utility companies on notice that they've got to look at this project, tell us in writing what conflicts, where they are, maybe force them to go out and get, our utility service to go out and figure out where those lines are. I think that's all we can do, just to do more of that, and knowing that Julie's right. That's at least 50 years old. So we're gonna hit conflicts.
We are. And so, I mean, if we can all be out there, it's to their advantage that we don't damage their infrastructure. So if they can be part of the notification and knowing ahead of time, they've got to do a little bit more work to make sure we know where stuff is.
Yeah, and one of the things we're going to do is we're going to go in pothole right now, so we know what's out there ahead of time. But I will tell you that the footprint on Central Avenue, at least phase one, is so much smaller than it is San Pablo, the current project that we're doing. So I would suspect that we're not going to have this significant impacts. But I think that your comment is very well advice, so we'll take it and we're going to go and see what else we can do to reach out to these utilities. And also, like I said, do some investigative work right now. We can capture it before it goes to construction.
And if I might add on to that, we are doing that to an extent on one of the utilities on this project. You may remember something Hisham's discussed in the past, that there was a East Bay utility line that needed to be relocated, and there was dispute over who should bear the cost of that. So we've entered into an agreement with them where we're going to pay them to do the work, but we've reserved the right to adjudicate this in court. So that's something we've retained an attorney. Apparently, Mullet also has some relationship with East Bay Mud, so we've retained a third-party attorney. And once the project's done, we'll proceed with that. So if we're successful there, number one, it kind of highlights what you're talking about, is to make sure that when the utilities are out there, that we're just not paying them to move it because they're there. We're really exploring what the responsibilities are. And then if we're successful, that might be a way to replenish the construction reserve, because that's what over $3 million in dispute. So that's in the cost that we're assuming is a cost we need to bear. But if we're successful, then we recover that and we can put it back in the West County account.
Ivan, question. Understandable question. Well, okay, Newell obviously knows a lot better than I do, but on a contract. But when we enter a contract and say something, because something like that happened in Brentwood also, when you're over 50 years of what you don't know, is there a clause, bid contract that says we're protected or
so?
In other words, is there a way to put that in there?
So let me give you a little bit of background as to how it's supposed to work. So the federal government and the state government mandate that in our specifications we put something called a different site condition. So the idea of this is that the contractor is under no obligation to know what's underground, and they're supposed to bid what's known. So in that way, the owner, all right, in the case us, we will get a lower bid because the contractor should not put risk or what's underground into the bid, because then you will always get higher bids. So the way it's supposed to work is the different site condition is there. So we receive the benefit of low bids all the time, but the contractor knows and understands that if something unknown it's captured during the normal operation or encountered during normal construction operation, that they will be compensated for those costs. So I don't know if that answers your questions, and if you want to add something to that, Randy?
I was going to go a little different direction. So, yeah, what I've been saying to kind of summarize it is this differing site condition, it leaves a contractor a bidding risk in their contract. We'd be bidding a lot of risk on contracts where there is no risk. So pay them if it happens, because that's something we talked about. I don't think you said it yet, Ivan, is these costs are costs that if the design had been done correctly, we'd be paying these costs as part of the bid. Now, it's always a little more inefficient to do it as part of a change order, but it's not work that isn't required. It's required work that just wasn't known. Now, what I was going to add, and this might be something different, another angle of what Commissioner Taylor is talking about. There's a lot of contracts. We're talking about the construction contracts. There are design contracts. There's utility contracts. We talked about those a little bit. There's a construction management contract. So in full disclosure mode, I'm not sure we're done talking about this project. I'm going to put Chad on the spot. Are you guys going to be able to finish within your budget? Yeah. My understanding is the designer might come back and ask for additional funds to deal with resolving. So you might want to register a few of these away when that happens and talk about that. And that's where maybe some of your comments are coming from, Commissioner Taylor, is different from a low bid contract that Ivan's managing. Those are negotiated contracts that we're paying them time and material, but should all the time be required, and particularly if there's time involved in fixing errors. So that's I won't be here when that happens, just setting it up, so.
Thank you, sir.
So you've answered a lot of my questions, but I had a couple left. Just out of curiosity, why did Caltrans reduce their maximum recycled material from 25 to 15%? Seems like they should be going the other way.
So this is, again, it's a directive that came from Caltrans, and what Caltrans and also the Federal Highway Administration mandated this change is that depending on what kind of mix the contractor produces, and it gets very technical, so I'm not prepared to answer all the technical questions about it, but depending what kind of recycle, because it's also recycled aggregate and it's also recycled binder, that depending how the mixture sets up, it will decrease the longevity of the asphalt concrete. So they're trying to mitigate that by decreasing the amount of those recycled materials in the asphalt concrete. So they're not necessarily staying away from the 25%. It's just that in certain instances, it might not be beneficial for the asphalt concrete to be poured under those conditions.
Yeah, that's kind of hard to understand. It seems like, Caltrans would have a standard and, they'd stick with it. I don't understand how they can change it in the middle of a project.
I don't know enough, you guys could answer. This is probably relatively new where we have this level of recycled material. So I think they're trying to do what you're thinking we should do, but if it's not performing, you have to bring it back to what they know. So this is closer to what they know, but I don't think that means they're going to give up on trying. It's they got to find the right mix.
So Caltrans they had a standard, and then they had second thoughts about it because it wasn't working out, and so.
Yeah, so generally the spec is approved by Caltrans. It's on an interstate system, high volume, high truck. And as they do their testing, they determine that much wrap in an asphalt concrete mix is not good. And so they'll lower that, and the spec is changed unilateral. You don't have a choice. You have to administer that, and you have to pay. I mean, if it were a Caltrans administered job and we were on the hook for the last dollar, this cost would be borne by us. It's just the way they operate, because what they're trying to do is get the best mix design out there, and they reserve the right to change that midstream. That's what happened to us on this project.
Well, and similar to what we had with some cracked concrete out on Highway 4, doing it twice is going to take more resources. If you do it once and you have to fix it, it's going to take more resources than what you'd get by recycled. So at the end of the day, it's still probably the most environmentally friendly if you consider that you may have to come back.
Okay, the second question is, in the staff report and doing this, you've discussed design-related issues. What does that mean? Does that mean like errors and omissions?
There might be one or two occasions where an error or omission issue could be involved. We will have to investigate it a little more.
Yeah.
But there is the possibility that is the case. And I think that's what Ross was referring to earlier when he was answering.
And if any of these rise to the level of negligence, then you might be looking for recovery from your design team. Is that okay? Okay, anybody have anything else on this? Do you have a motion? Okay, motion by Arner, second by Tadson. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, next item, comprehensive annual financial report and management letter for the fiscal year ended June 30th, 2016.
Good morning, APC Chair. But my name is Randy Carlton. I'm the CFO. I'll just take a moment and kick this off. Brian has prepared some slides for you today to distill, an 80-page financial report down to a few slides. You have.
Thank you very much.
You have a printout of the slides because graphically, some of the font may appear small on the screen. So we do not intend to hit every line of the slide information. We're certainly willing to stop along the way and answer any of your questions. This will be our fifth year that we've prepared the comprehensive annual financial report The CAFR, as we call it, is a document that's primarily a compliance matter. We're required by law to prepare an audited financial statement. But it's also a very useful tool for management and our bondholders, those that invest in the authority. Bond rating agencies also obtain these documents and use them in their ongoing surveillance of the authority's bond credit, bond rating. So today, Brian will handle the financial part of it, and then he will turn it over to David Bullock to his right, that will give you a brief overview of the management letter. And lastly, this is an action item. We're asking you to accept the report, and then it will be sent to the board for their acceptance later this month. So with that, I will turn it over to Brian Kelleher.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm here to present the CAFR to you, as described by Randy. This is our 5th year, as he has mentioned, about the CAFR. In years prior to that, we did the basic financial statements. What we do is submit it to the Government Financial Officers Association, and this adds an extra layer of transparency. And as working in accounting, we don't get the construction awards. We like to get a financial award. We like to try and keep pace with them. So in the introductory section, we go through some of the basic things that are happening at the authority and some of the things that are happening in the upcoming year. And then we get into the financial section, which includes the independent auditor's report that David will speak about. And then we get into the management discussions and analysis that breaks down all the nuts and bolts and everything like that. Then we have the governmental-wide financial statements, which takes the full accrual process, brings all the amortization of bonds and other items as well. And then we get into the basic fund financial statements, which is basically your profit and loss for each of the things. And then the notes in the financial statements talks about in detail items like all of our cash and how we have all our investments segregated, and then it gets into the pension and OPEB obligations and drills down into our debt, and it shows our schedules for future payments and different things like that, which go into the government-wide financial statements. And then in the back, we have the statistical section, which goes through some basic economic information about Contra Costa County, and then goes into some details about the authority and shows like a 10-year look. And with the authority, we have the sales tax, which is pretty consistent, and it continues to increase since the downturn in 2009. As you look here, this is the statement of net position. This is the full accrual of everything that's in the authority. We have the assets up top, and you can see that that's increased slightly, about $21,000. During the fiscal year, we issued a bond. We refinanced some of our 2012 bond, and we additionally got $85 million in bond proceeds. And we haven't spent down all those proceeds, so that's why you can see the increase from $216 million to $237 million. If you look at just our cash and investments, we're staying about the same. It's gone down about $2 million. Our LAIF balance has gone down $2 million. It all depends on the timing of the use of our pay-as-we-go for certain projects and programs. Our liabilities down there in the middle, you can see that that's increased from $502 million to about $590 million. Again, that's directly related to our long-term debt, the increase. The new bond in 2015 was $166 million. About $84 million was new money. $82 million was refinanced. So you can see the increase there, and we made about a $12 million bond payment during the year, so that kind of tells a story as to the increase there. And then as you get down to the bottom, the total net position, again, it goes from about $246 million to $301 over the last year. Again, that's related to debt. There's nothing substantial that has changed for the authority. As we look at the statement of activities, we compare the prior year again to this year. Our sales tax number, which is a percentage that breaks down to all the projects and programs, is up about $4 million, about 5%. that and our capital grants and operation grants and contributions for the projects and some of the CMA functions stayed relatively about the same. Again, it's no loss in funding, it's the timing of the projects that we have. Then we have our general expenses. Just the bottom line there is a decrease of about $7 million. As you look into the transportation projects, which is the majority of everything that we do, as far as dollar-wise, high dollars, has decreased about $12 million. Again, that's due to the timing of the projects that we have. As Highway 4 is closing up and we have the I-80, the interchange, the 160 interchange, again, is coming to completion. Some of the larger projects that we had in 2016 is the EBART. So there's some of the debt service slightly increased because of the bond issuance last October. So that's some of that information there. This is just the governmental fund highlights. I kind of mentioned most of these as we've gone through. Sales tax revenue is up $4 million. Investment income was up about $783,000. A lot of that's due to the interest rates have increased a little bit. I go back and we have a good portion of money that's sitting in LAIF, and that was earning about 0.25%. That's now up to about 0.5% recently. So, and that's continued. It's probably up about 0.75% when I looked at it the other day. So, in addition to our normal investments, things are increasing a little bit there. A lot of that investment income goes back into the projects. And as we look at our federal, state, and local revenues, it stayed about the same. And as our RM2 money went up about $10 million, that was for the SR4 160 connector ramps during the fiscal year 16. Our BATA funds decreased as the SR4 160 utilized all the funding there. And then the anomaly here is our cities went down because a lot of the cities do some contributions for some Highway 4 work. Other projects like the sound wall on 680 in 2014-15, we received about $6.5 million from Danville of the TVTC funds. That wasn't there this year. It was kind of a one-time payment. So you can see that it went down $7 million there. One of the things that we like to talk about whenever we do a presentation is we have that 1% cap on administration for admin salaries. We run constantly about 78-79% on that, which is good. Our local streets and maintenance was about $16.8 million. That's tied to about 20% of the revenue we receive. Program expenditures, which is we have set percentages for everything that we do, was about $20 million. Transportation projects, we keep talking about the SR4 East widening, which is finishing. SR60 is done. Increases was for EBART as our contributions for the third rail, I-80 San Pablo, and the I-80 680 carpool lane that we've been working on. Debt service, we paid about $28.6 million. Of that, $12.5 million was for a payment on the 2012 bonds. We did the bond issuance. We netted about $100 million on that. $84 million was new money, and then we also had we received a premium on those bonds as well that we were going to use for some of our interest payments on that as well. Our transfers into the general fund comes directly from the 2012 and 2015 bond proceeds. That was about $76.3 million, and that goes to pay for some of the large CIP projects, the MSJ funding on that. And that covers that piece. And then as far as the authority disclosure, which is the notes to the financial statements, as we talked about cash, or first I want to cover the GASB requirements. If you remember last year, all of the cities were implementing the pension liabilities. So as far as this year, the only change, there was a new table that was added, which is the GASB 72, where we report our investments in fair value measurement and application. Just on a 30,000-foot level, you have to identify the rating, how they're classified. Are they in an open value, or is there a competitive analysis to that? think David can speak more on that if you have more questions on that. The big thing for us is cash and investments. We had about $211 million. We have $144 million of that invested directly with Public Trust is our advisor on a good portion of that. That's about $128.7 million. And then we ended the year with $15 million, whereas the prior year we had $17 million in LAIF. And then we also have about $66 million, which is your restricted cash that's listed in the balance sheets. That's related to $45.5 million, which is project proceeds. The rest is capitalized interest that we have to make in the next few future years. And then we also pay a portion of our interest in principal every month, and it's accumulated the difference there. Long-term debt is about $436 million, which is the issuance of the 2015 bonds, refunded bonds, and then we also, every year we have to talk about our swap agreement, and there's a fair value. As interest rates go down, our liability potential risk is sitting there, but what we do is we take money out of our investments, we stick them as collateral, we still continue to earn the interest on that. We have sufficient funds, and recently that number has come down drastically as interest rates have been going up in the last few weeks. That position was $62.3 million. I think right now it's about $47 million. So we're in a good position there. Note 8 and 9 is the pension plan and OPEB. As we did in May of 2015, you allowed us to pay off our liability, and that's reported now because as we present our financials, we're a year behind of getting the information from CalPERS. And that this year was actually $388. So it's technically, since we round to the thousands here, it's zero, which is something we like to present. And we also share that with our bondholders, hoping that that makes us look in a very fiscal, responsible way. Net position and fund balances, again, that's unrestricted net position is $489 million. A lot of that is due to the debt that we carry so that we can build these projects now and enjoy them while we can. And then one of the things that we have down here is the authority has constructed $1.5 billion in capital assets, and those are the projects like the San Pablo Road that we're talking about, the Highway 4. And included in that is Measure J funding and all of that capital grants and different things that we get as well. And then in fiscal year 16 for the capital projects, we put in $130.5 million. Again, as we look at the statistical section, we have the financial trends for the last 10 years. We have our revenue capacity, we have debt capacity, and then we have our economic and demographic information as countywide, and then we have our operation information. And one of the schedules in there, we kind of list, from an accounting perspective, how many checks are we issuing, how many receivables, and some things like that, so we can see how the admin staff is doing and the workload that we're taking there. And it's one of the requirements for the transparency and part of the award package as well. With that, I'll turn it over to David, and thank you very much and welcome.
Good morning. Thank you. Well, that was a very thorough presentation, Brian, so I'm not sure you stole all my thunder. I don't really have anything else to say. Just kidding. But you did talk about a lot of the things I was going to talk about. So the first thing I wanted to point to your attention, I believe you have a copy of the CAFR in front of you, is the first, page 1 in the financial section is our audit report, the auditor's opinion. Just to highlight that real quick, management is responsible for preparing the CAFR itself, and we're responsible for expressing an opinion as to whether or not the information in the report is fairly stated. So it's a much labor of Brian and Randy and his team to put the CAFR together. And we've gone through it, and I'm happy to report that we've expressed an unmodified opinion on the financial statements. We believe these financial statements are fairly stated. That's on page 1. And page 2 kind of goes on to give a little more clarification on the level of responsibility the audit has over the management's discussion and analysis, the other schedules and sections of the CAFR. And then also to let you know that we also issue a separate report on internal controls and compliance. So that's the independent auditor's report. The next section is the MD&A, and I just want to kind of point out that the authority likes to clarify the fact that while it has a deficit net position as a result of all the construction that gets capitalized by others. So the authority builds things and then gives it to others to maintain and take ownership of. And so the deficit net position is reflective of the debt issued in advance of collecting those sales tax dollars. So as those sales tax dollars come in and the debt gets repaid, that net position deficit will go away. So normally, if you think of a net position, a deficit, you think it pretty negatively, but there's a reason for it here at the authority. And then I'm starting on page 20 is the financial statements, and Brian was pretty detailed in his analysis going through the numbers, and so I won't bore you with that. But the footnotes follow the financial statements, and they provide a lot of context to the numbers so you understand what those numbers are made of. And so I just had 5 areas I wanted to highlight. Brian touched on them already. First of all, the authority implemented GASB 75 this year, and that's the fair value standard. Fair value is not a new concept. You've been reporting your investments at fair value since GASB 31 back in the 1990s. But what's new is GASB added clarification on how the investment should be valued. And then they also require that table that Brian discussed, which basically is just a presentation of how observable those fair values are. Is there an active market where you can readily see those numbers, or is it something that has to be using a price matrix come up with those net values, or is it management's estimates and kind of unobservable inputs that you have to then verify, looking at appraisals or other things? And so you can see that everything is in either category 1 or 2, and so they're pretty observable on the fair values. So it lets you know that the numbers that you're reporting on your financial statements are pretty easy to verify in terms of fair value. The second point I wanted to illustrate was the debt issuance. I thought that was a highlight this year. There was new bonds issued. It was a refunding of the 2012 B bonds, but it was also new money coming in. The present value savings of that bond issue was about $5 million, as disclosed in the financial statements. So I thought that was an important activity for the year. Also in the debt note is a discussion on the interest rate swap. And while that's not new, it's important to keep an eye on that as time moves, because it's right now at a negative fair value position. And you can see that it's $62.3 million at June 30th, and that's just one point in time, and it's based on the rates of today's market on short-term bonds and how that compares to what you've issued. I think the important thing to recognize is you've achieved what you were trying to achieve, is hedge the interest rates by fixing these long-term bonds. And so the rate of the bonds is under 4%, which most people would have the opinion that's a good rate. But because of the current market, you're in a negative position. If you look on page 50, you can kind of see the cash flow of those net settlements on the interest rate swap, and it's an $85 million over the life of the bonds if they continue out to their full maturity. And so that's where the $62 million position is derived. It's the present value of those future cash flows. The next area I want to highlight is
before you go further through
Go ahead.
there.
Sure.
Because you're obviously on, and what I guess I'm going to ask right now. The market is changing very dramatically, and it's changing also the interest and also bond values. Is that what kind of effect? Because it's going to change. I don't want you setting up here this morning and saying it's not going to, because
Absolutely.
God bless
it changes it's evaluated on a weekly basis.
Well, yeah, but I'm talking about it's going long term right now. It's going to change pretty good. Is that going to hinder us or help us?
If interest rates start going up, it's going to help you. It's going to decrease.
That's what, and what does that do to the swap?
Basically, it's a net settlement. You pay the interest rate that you would have paid on those bonds at the variable rate to the counterparty, and they pay you, or you pay them the 3.7%, and then they pay you what you would otherwise have paid. So that net difference is the settlement amount. So as that interest rate increases, basically what they would owe you is more. And if the interest rates increase over the 3.878%, then in effect it could be an asset. It could be a position where it's a positive instead of a negative.
Now, you better. He's digging deep here. He's going into the weeds, and I'm still up above ground. But would that go toward principal on the swap?
Thank you for that explanation,
Okay,
David.
and then I'll be quiet.
Just very, very briefly, as interest rates increase, and they have been in the 10-year bond area, the value of the swap increases. So our requirement to post collateral against the negative value of that swap declines. So we'll be bringing back some of those securities that are currently being held by Bank of America as collateral. So for the swap, as interest rates rise, the value of the swap rises, and we're in a better position. Now, intuitively, one may say, well, if the value of the swap is going up, well, let's consider terminating the swap. And we look at that every month as interest rates change. The other side of the coin, however, is though as interest rates rise and the value of the swap goes up, so does the cost of borrowing. So if we wanted to get out of the swap, we would presumably issue long-term bonds to pay it off, but at a higher cost of borrowing. And as David mentioned, we're looking at a all-in borrowing cost now with the swap of less than 4%, which isn't a bad cost of borrowing.
Thank you.
The next thing I wanted to point out was the pension plan and currently the CalPERS administers the authority's pension plan, and it's the cost sharing pool. So what gets reported in your financial statements is your proportionate share of that overall liability of the cost sharing pool. And as Brian pointed out, because of the lump sum payment you made last year, your liability for this year ended up being zero. Which is a good position to be in, obviously. But that's going to fluctuate every year. Every year the actuarial valuation is going to come out, and you're going to compare that valuation against what you have in the trust, or your proportionate share of that trust. And so it's never really technically paid off. It'll just be evaluated on an annual basis. And you could consider lump sum payments in the future if you wanted to continue to keep that net position or that net liability at zero. And if the market turns around or has good years, it actually could be an asset. It just depends on your position at any given point in time. And then the final thing I wanted to highlight was the OPEB. The OPEB's on note 9, and currently you have an asset on the books, and that's because you advanced some money into the trust. Under the current standards for OPEB, you look at it on an annual basis. What's the actuarially required contribution versus what's actually contributed, and so that asset has been amortizing down from when you paid it several years ago. But just keeping in mind that that's not really an asset. I mean, if you think about it, it's an unfunded liability, and so the asset is just an accounting entry to track how those contributions affect the OPEB over time. When you implement GASB 75, and that's the new OPEB standard, that'll all go away, and you'll be measuring it much like you do the pension liability, where you take the present value of those benefits versus what's in the trust, and that difference will be reported as a liability in your financial statements. And so, and that's not required to be implemented until 2018. CalPERS, however, has early implemented GASB 74, and that's on the plan side. This year, in 2016, so that information will be available to the authority for 2017. So the authority may consider early implementing GASB 75 and showing that OPEB liability on the financial statements for fiscal year 17. And with that, I close it and be available for any questions you might have.
Questions? Newell?
Well, first of all, a great report from both of you, and I think this agency should be pretty proud of detail that's in this presentation. I'm not going to ask a question about our favorite subject, but we had one page in here, page 45, the actual CAFR was draft here, and it's not draft there. They look the same. Was there anything different? That was on assets.
We just wanted to make sure you read the report. No, seriously, that was in the closing moments of trying to get this to you.
Just missed one of the pages.
You know, you work with the auditors in October, and then there's a lot of questions that go back and forth, and then you get to the last moments of trying to get it to print it to the press and everything like that, and they send it over as a draft for final review by the authority, and I reviewed it, and by the time I sent it back to them, they sent it back to me, and there was one page on there that they didn't remove the watermark on.
Okay.
And so once they sent it back to me, I didn't go through it page by page. So
I was paid attention. I just want to make sure, and it's not a big.
It's fixed in the actual hard copy that you have.
Yes.
That we'll send
Got
for
it.
the award.
Good. I would just make two comments then. That one, we really should commend Randy, Brian, you guys, and the whole staff. This is really an in-depth CAFR because we are unique. We have to qualify so many things because we're not a business. We don't have assets. We don't make a profit. We're here to expend on behalf of the taxpayers the money they've given us to do specific projects. So we're getting smaller and smaller as time goes on. But I think the narrative on here, which is a tremendous amount of work, tells the reader pretty clearly those explanations. Why is this number different? Because most people are used to looking at financials. Hey, well, you had this much last year. Why is it different? And I think we should commend ourselves really for excellent reporting on that. And I think it's worth highlighting. I don't know any other agency around that has zero OPED or zero retirement. And I know it was a technical explanation. We're doing it. I think we've set a standard going forward that we will always pay this forward, always be fiscally responsible about those costs, be fair to employees as we share the burden of that cost. And that's notable. That is really notable that there aren't any other agencies around that are in this type of position. So I think across the board, as much as we're beating up a small project earlier on some dollars, the fact is that this CAFR clearly delineates this agency different than everybody else at a much higher level of transparency, at a high level of fiscal responsibility, both in managing taxpayer dollars, but in managing future potential impact. So I really commend everybody for this one. This is really good. Thank you.
Bob?
Yeah. First of all, I want to thank you for, first of all, I could read it, which is a lot different than the last time we were up here. I think Randy did a good job there. And the other issue is that when this comes to the board, the full board, this is great. Can you make sure that they'll be able to read it and kind of keep this same MO? Because, yeah, simplicity on the synopsis, because if Bob Taylor can understand it, this whole board will understand it. No, it's a great standard, but I really think we are to definitely emphasize that we owe a zero balance. As I follow up with him, in fact, that probably should be in big letters, big numbers. Zero looks great. It really does.
They did it pretty big.
Yeah, well, but
they bolded it.
Well, they did bold it. But the idea is, I wanted to thank you because of the time. You know, obviously every city has this. And I'm going to take this back because I don't understand my city sometimes. This was done very, very, very good. I'd like to commend staff. See, you went away from Brentwood. See what happened? You come over here and do a better job.
I learned it all from you, Bob, and Brentwood.
Anyway, I just wanted to thank you, and I would hopefully we'll do the same type of thing for the full board.
And you want to offer a motion to accept it?
Yes.
Second.
Okay. We have a motion by Taylor, second by, you have a question? Arnrick? Okay. Okay.
I just want to make
question?
brief comments. Well, I also want to thank everybody. I think the other thing that we forget that sometimes gets lost among how used we are to how well the agency does business is not only do we have a zero pension obligation, we had a commitment to the residents of Contra Costa County to deliver certain projects and programs within but accepting uncertainty as to how much tax revenue we would actually develop. And I don't know if we can fit it in here somewhere, but a statement that says, we are on track to deliver the contractual obligations, contractual in quotes, the commitments we had to the residents in return for collecting the revenues of sales tax and other funds. I mean, to me, that's, if I'm a resident, that's why I think we're here.
Right.
And I think that ought to also receive emphasis if we can figure out a way to fit that within the context of the report.
Do we need to add that to the motion, recommend that? Is that
It's up to the motion maker.
Did you get the message?
Yes, I got the message.
okay? Okay.
We agree.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion carries, and that
Thank you.
brings us to correspondence and news clippings. Are there any? Commissioner and staff comments?
I have a comment.
Okay.
Commissioners, I have a couple of comments. One, this is more administrative. Our building was sold to another organization, and Randy, when does this sale finalize? This week?
Yes, and the new management company steps in on December 6th.
So that's latest on the building. Today's Throwback Thursday for Federal Highway Administration. Does anybody know where the first federal aid highway project in the United States was completed in 1918?
California.
Yes. Any more specific?
The Lincoln Highway?
Was it Contra Costa County was the first federal aid highway project. So I just tweeted that out for us for you.
What was it?
I don't know what route because they won't allow me to get that information at the time. But that was the first completed federal aid highway. Oh, here it is, right here. It's December 12th, 2014. Doesn't tell me all. And then I wanted to introduce our latest hire, Firdos Fifi Jahan. She is going to take the administrative assistant position. We've reorganized the way the staffing is set up for our executive assistant, administrative assistants. So the administrative assistants report to Terry Ann. So Terry Ann has become a supervisor. And so she's going to help make sure that the staff is spread out and the work is spread out among the four administrative assistants. So they no longer report to the deputies. They actually report to Terry Ann, who reports to me. And so the staffing is changed. But Fifi has a master's degree in public administration. I only say that because as we were recruiting and they were down to the final finalists, Terry Ann mentioned that, wow, we're going to hire somebody that has a master's degree in public administration. How long is she going to stay with us? And everybody laughed other than Terry Ann because we had the same concerns about Terry Ann. And so we only hire the best, and then our job is to keep the best engaged, educated, and all those good things. And so I wanted to have Fifi say a few words, if she could, about herself to our board members.
Speak loud.
Can you come over or give her a microphone, please?
I thought I could get away without using this. As Randy said, I recently completed my MPA at CSU EB, East Bay, Hayward, depending on the individual. I'm very, very happy to be here, excited to be part of such a talented team of individuals, and I'm sure you're more aware than I of how excellent this agency is. I'm very proud to say that I'm part of the authority, and I thank you for letting me join you today. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so the beauty of when I speak into this microphone, apparently somebody else is listening. And so Matt Kelly just texted me back and said, Lincoln Highway from Alameda County line to Richmond, 2.55 miles, the first federal aid system or secondary system roadway in the United States. 1918. Congratulations. So we're carrying on. We're still carrying on building infrastructure.
Okay, anybody else? Any other business? Okay, the meeting is adjourned until January the 5th, 2017. board meeting on the 14th.